Truth Talks. Please, I'm excited about the Truth Talks. They are addressing true fellowship and what it means, what true fellowship and corporate worship looks like according to the Bible.
Well, let's recap. It's better to start somewhere than not place our foot on solid ground. So let's go there. Let's hit up 7. I'm not gonna run through 7 fast. I'll take it slow as if I did the other ones. Even though if it's something that you have already heard, don't worry about it. Take it in again, absorb it for a second time because you might have missed something the first time, or you might have caught something. You might catch something else. So here we go. Let's talk about chapter 7 of Chronicles. So first Chronicles chapter 7 focus on the descendants of Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher. Here's a breakdown of this chapter. So the descendant of Issachar. This chapter begins with a list of Issachar's sons and descendants. Issachar was one of the tribes that Israel settled into the promised land. So this was one of the ones that went over. They were known for their agriculture and their role in Israel's economy. You can find this in Genesis 49, 14 through 15. And you can also hear about it in Deuteronomy 33, 18 through 19. Deuteronomy 33, 18 through 19. All right. Their territory was fertile and productive, making them an important part of Israel's agricultural output. Now remember, the clans, even though they were not a kingdom, they still interacted within themselves in trade and also outside of trade. We heard that in the laws, right? A lot of the laws talked about how to conduct yourself in trade. So this tribe would have probably been the ones that did a lot of the harvesting, the agricultural, the farming. So they would have been the main ones. Not saying they would have been the sole ones, but they would have probably been the ones that taught all the other ones how to do those things to make them prosper in their own clans. All right, note that the men of Issachar was described as men who understood the times with the knowledge of what Israel should do. This is talked about when we get later in Chronicles. It's going to be in 12:32. So you don't have to highlight it, just know it's coming. And we're going to talk about them a little bit more in detail in their wisdom. All right. With descendants of Benjamin. The descendants of Benjamin talked about in chapter 7, 6 through 12. This chapter provides genealogy and descendants of Benjamin, including notable figures. Benjamin was a significant tribe in Israel history, producing leaders like we know King Saul, the first king of Israel. He was the one that everybody in Israel said, "Give us our king," because we want to be like the nations around. And if you're following this genealogy and you're following as you're following the people, you see what's happening. All of these other kings are around. Now, I was fortunate enough to go see my sister this weekend, and she helped me out, and she gave me the book. Now, here's the reason why when we see the names and we hear some of the things developing, these are some of the pressures that are going on around Israel. So we know that Israel has its first kingdom, right? Its first king. Israel demands its first king in 1 Samuel 8 through 9. 1 Samuel 8 through 9. Saul is chosen and anointed. We know how that story goes. But this is what was going on with Babylon and Assyria. Because we think Babylon and Assyria just popped up on the scene like, hey, surprise, we grew. But actually, Babylon and Assyria was a seed that grew when the Semitics and the Semitics and the Sumerian tribes were actually living colonized together. Then Sumerians said, well, you know what? We're smart. We have our government. We have laws, and we want to build up our own governments, our own kingdoms. And that's where we go back, we start to see kings. We've seen Edom get kings because they were in competition with the people around them. They were building up, and as they were building and saying, this is God. That's why you hear a lot of people talk about the oldest text. Oh, the oldest text is from the Sumerian text. Of course, because they were the first ones to start kind of getting together, building libraries, and setting up stational grounds. I say that because this is what Babylon was doing. Babylon and Assyria together at this time, let's say 1060 to 1020, Babylon revolted against Assyria, ruled and put an end to the first Assyrian Empire. Sounds very crazy that Babylon and Assyria is fighting and Babylon is beating Assyria, but we all know from the studies of Daniel, where did Assyria come from? They was getting beat up. So they looked to the say, man, they beating us up. We're going to go beat people up. So now y'all starting to see that these kingdoms around, they were doing things too. All right. All Remember this name in 1050 to 10,000. If you notice, the time is going backwards. It's going down, right? It's a countdown because this is BC, before Christ. So the timeline is going in an opposite direction. I'm pointing out a lot of stuff because when we get into the kingdoms, into really dividing up the kingdoms, lineage and these names that you hear, you'll start to understand how what Babylon and Assyria had always been in a wait as a people. So in 1050 to 1000, these are the years, Armenian invasion of the Fertile Crescent, where these words is tiny, recommended with a greater intensity than ever before, with the center at Aleppo and Damascus. Here, Damascus, right on the trade routes from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates. They prospered greatly. In 10,000 to 950, again, this is BC, Assyrians' revival, expansion from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf and the westward to Cappadocia. So you see that this is history, all right? But you see that Babylon is cooking. They're not the only ones.
You said 1000 BC, and so you said that this was 1,000 years before Christ came.
1,000 years before the coming of Christ. And again, a lot of these history books and the stuff that is in a lot of the front of the older, like I was just telling the gentleman back there, a lot of your old Bibles, you didn't have access to the library. You didn't have, well, you had it, but it was hard to get to it. So when they sold these people Bibles and they would take them into their home, they would give them as much information as possible. So I have some of the older Bibles that was passed down to me. Some of my relatives, my sister allowed me to get her Bible that was given to her, and it gave me this rich insight so I can bring it back to you and show you that these nations and kingdoms was cooking. So before we get to the actual kings of Israel, understand that other kings were already coming up. Now remember what God said about Israel. If you do what is right, you will be protected from everything about you. But if you do wrong, you will face my wrath.
That's the reason I asked that, so we all can see that if this was 1,000 years before Christ, the prophets are still hearing from God.
Yes.
They're still hearing from God. So with the statement he just made, if you do, who was saying if you do? God was still talking to the prophets, because it was 600 years before he stopped talking to the prophets, because it was 400 years. So just wanted to just put that out there that God is still talking to the prophets. Great.
No, perfect.
Also, at the same time, when you start talking about, my mind is one.
They got some pills.
Now, I just want to let you know I gave you Babylon and Assyria because we know from our studies and hearing Daniel, we know that they're going to be the ones that come in. Those are going to be the ones that I want you to keep an eye on. I want to let you know that the enemy is lying in wait. What's the point of having a whole book, of not having a story, but also being able to think about it as if people who are, one, aware and unaware? Meaning, right now, you guys can stand in the feet of Israel in its upcoming state, David transitioning from this running in the wild warrior to this now king that's going to be doing all these things with his mighty crew. And don't let it get past you, because that crew is pretty decent. When they talk about a squad, if you want a squad, yeah, if you want a squad, that's the squad you want. All right, but I'm not forgetting where we are talking about Benjamin. I'm just trying to point out the fact that now Benjamin is a line that's being focused on for a reason, because we have that first king. So let's get back to 8. That was just Babylon. I could go on and tell you about what Egypt is doing at that time, the Phoenicia and Lydia, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, China, Japan, India. I want you to be in mind that the world had nations. So when God was talking about nations, he wasn't talking about just simple Middle Eastern. His concern was the world, because all of those nations came from Japheth, Shem, and Ham. So when God is saying, and if you see some of the history of the books, and you say, well, nobody really breaks it down like this biblically. It is broken down biblically because the Bible is history. It's a history book. I was telling somebody the greatest tragedy they do for the Bible is putting it in the religious section. Put it in the history section, so when people go pick up the book, they would understand they're reading the history of God. So with that being said, the world is moving. The world is booming. It's getting by. So let's continue to talk about the Benjamites and what they were known for. Benjamite notable leaders included, we talked about Saul, the first king. He played a significant role in Israel history. We'll dive more into that as we go further and talk about specifically Saul's family. But in those chapters, they talk about all the Benjamites by name and some of the lineage. Then we go to the descendants of Naphtali, which is 7, 13, huh? That's it. They get that Naphtali get a very small. Briefly mentioned Naphtali's and other tribes. Now listen, Naphtali, although their genealogy is brief, Naphtali is an important tribe in Israel history. They settled near the Regency of Galilee and played a role in Israel agriculture and agriculture and economic life. Again, Naphtali. Don't get too belabored of what tribe is doing what. Just know that the tribes are starting to function as large communities, cities. So when we hear these tribes and we hear these conversations saying, hey, I don't want you to do this for my clan or my tribe, it's because they're not talking just about a little 4-man tent like they were in the wilderness. Now they're making decisions for their whole tribe, which if now is probably grown. As we've seen the battle arrangement on the picture, which we didn't really get into, we talked about, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people just in one tribe. You see what I'm saying? So when these people are talking about how they conduct the business for their tribe, they're illustrating why it's such a thing. So as we look here, we see that. So Naphtali, even though small, they were by the seas, and we knew that the sea. But as we see in Jesus' ministry, what was one of the things that were some of the things? What was one of the things that the Jews were being heavily taxed by? See, the fish. Mm-hmm. A lot of their taxes was heavily, and the fishermen, when Peter was on the boat. So I put all this together to say, don't just because they're small, their importance is they maintain the seas of Galilee, which was a big impact for the tribes. Because the tribes right now, remember, it went from being just 12 individual tribes to one head. So that took time. And even we even learned in one of the Sundays that Moses was told by his father-in-law that you need help. All right. So let's go to the next one. Manasseh. Manasseh is 14 through 19. The chapter provides genealogy of Manasseh's descendant, including notable figures. Manasseh was one of the tribes that settled in the Promised Land, one of the ones that went over. Manasseh's descendant include notable figures, and the tribe plays a significant role. I said that. All right, the tribal settled in the tribe. They settled in the region east of the Jordan River. It was known for their military prowess. So as you see, we got agriculture, we got the seas, we got leaders, we got everything going on to make what we're getting ready to go into. When we start seeing and hearing how these kings and they're building up this and putting these people over bands and over hundreds and thousands, we see that these men who committed this type of respect, they were the ones that were coming from these tribes. They were the ones that was coming from David's travels. All right, so they settled in a region east of the Jordan River and were known for their military prowess. This is the tribe of Manasseh, the descendants of Ephraim. This chapter describes the descendants of Ephraim, including notable characters. Ephraim was, and that's 7:20 through 29. Ephraim was significant in Israel's history, often representing the northern kingdom. I think this is kind of like one of them things now is like, oh, wait a minute, represent the northern kingdom. I thought Israel was just one kingdom. So we start to see, even in conversation, certain clans was representing certain sides of the kingdom before the kingdom was established, because as we know, all of these were inside of there. So to give it a little insight. They were also military. They played a significant role in politics, military, and territory, and was strategically important. Then we have Asher. Asher is from 7:30 to 40. They got a nice long one. These descendants include Asher's sons' descendants, the ones of the tribe that settled in the Promised Land. Asher was known for its rich agriculture and their role in Israel economy. Their territory was also fertile and productive, making an important part. So we see that Israel, with their sheep, with their agriculture, we understand that when some of the language that Jesus was using, now you understand sheeps, waters, gates, this, because these people were familiar with their environment because they grew up in it, they lived in it, they studied it. So the words, when Jesus was saying it to them, it was clear. And I know might seem like I'm trailing off here, but if you stay with me, all of this will make sense in the end. It's my kind of like, remember anybody ever tell you that? Like, if it was a test, the teacher would stomp his foot. Well, it's not a test. I'm just saying these things might come back. And as they come back, now they make sense. You know, you start to hear things that didn't make sense at first, but now it does. You know, now it's, oh, this is why Jesus talk about sheep, because Israel had a lot of agriculture. Oh, this is why he says wheat and tariff, because they were there. Oh, this is why he talks about. You see, take nothing in the Bible is wasted. It's just told in a way that you have to kind of twist it a little bit. Not twist the words, just twist your thoughts to see what is being said. So in here, we see that Israel is a booming, even though they don't have a king, they're impacting an agricultural area on a level because it's 12 tribes of people who all are in agreement. I told my wife a story today about how when I was at the hospital, I don't know if it's a good story or a bad story, but it was a story. All right, I was at the hospital and I found out something, that the power of unity is a dangerous thing. I took 20 people that was my friends and we went in and we won an election. Basically, I unified 20 people that were with me and we all went in one election. Can you imagine what Israel's impact is on the nation? 12 tribes, 12 brothers scattered out all over the land with a bunch of family members. And if we say, tomorrow we fight, you literally have to fight for, look, I think it was like 2 point something million people. They are going to show up if for no other reason as that's my brother and I'm not going to let you do that. So it was one of them things. You couldn't fight one without the other. Except for that one time when they tried to throw the other brother in the long story. All right, so we see these brothers connected. They stay connected because they have a good economical foothold. So that's what chapter 7 is, all right? It gives us that glimpse of that family. The chapter 7 comes around details of the descendants of several tribes of Israel, highlight the genealogy and notable figures. These genealogies generate the complex and richness of Israel history. Now here's the breakdown of chapter 8. All right, chapter 8, the tribe of Benjamin. We're getting very specific now. We went from telling all the tribes, and now they just said, bloop, I'm going to pick out Benjamin, because Benjamin's history now we need to know the line, because it becomes, even though Saul was inserted, let's say, midway through the lineage, by Saul being inserted midway through the lineage, it made all the other lineage important. You see what I'm saying? We couldn't say Saul is the king without, well, who did Saul come from? Who was this? Who was that? Who was that? Where did he come from? Because even Saul, when he became king, they said, hey, Saul, Benjamin, they're the smallest tribe. So these things were tracked and known just in conversation. So let's talk a little bit about the tribe of Benjamin. Chapter 8 focus on the descendants of Benjamin, particularly the family of Saul, Israel's first king. Here's a quick breakdown. Chronicles 1 through 28. All right. 8, 1 through 28. Chapters provide a detailed genealogy of Benjamin's descendants, including the family of Saul. The genealogy highlights the importance of the tribe of Benjamin and their roles in Israel. The tribe of Benjamin played a significant role in Israel's history, producing notable leaders, as we mentioned, Saul. You can read about this in 1 Samuel 10, 20 through 24. And if y'all remember, I know we did Samuel and first and second Samuel, kind of back to back. And I know we did it a while back, but we're gonna get a couple callbacks here. We're gonna get some moments where it's like, wow, we bringing that back? Yeah, because it's gonna be told a different way. Because again, the chroniclers told it kind of a different way. They told it how it was told from oral presentation over time. All right. Benjamin territories were strategically located near Jerusalem, making it an important part of Israel. Now remember, Jerusalem was one of the towns that David eventually took. It wasn't always theirs. So when they took it, you have to think wherever the tribe was, close to whatever that area was, when the fight came, it was pretty easy because you already had a tribe right there. Again, Israel were in a promised land and they're all centrally located, ready to go if they have to help each other as a tribe. This is in Joshua 18, 11 through 28. Talks about Benjamin's territory strategically near Jerusalem, making them an important part of Israel, geographic and political. All right, the genealogy of Benjamin. The genealogy and strengths the continued of Israel's story, Israel's history, and the significance of the tribe of Benjamin. You can read about them also in Genesis 49, 27, Deuteronomy 33, 12. Now we're going to get into the family of Saul in chapter 8, 29 through 40. The chapter includes the focus on the family of Saul, including the descendants and the settlement. Genealogy demonstrates the continuing importance of Saul's family, and Saul continued to play the role in the history. I know I'm rolling along because a lot of this is information that we know, but I want to say it because once it's said, it kind of sticks in your mind to what's coming next. So Saul's descendants included his son Jonathan, Mephibosheth, which is an important figure in Israel royal court. You get 2 Samuel 4, 9, 1 through 13. All right. Now, it's a lot that goes on, and we talked about what happened with Saul. Now, we know Saul became king. We know during Saul's reign, Saul did good things in the beginning, right? We seen what he did with Jabesh Gilead when they was having issues. He went over there and he protected them. Saul wasn't just a bad guy off the rip. Saul was a king that was taking over a kingdom that was brand new to everyone of Israel. He tried to rule it as he saw the ones around. As we mentioned, Babylon is right there. They're ruling their way. Their governments are doing it. So I can't say what got into Saul that day. I can only say what the Bible said about Saul. And it said Saul was disobedient. Saul listened to the people as they started to fall apart and scramble around him. This type of lifestyle that Saul had, and also pursuing David when David was now the new anointed king. And instead of taking David saying, you are the new anointed king, which I know my role has passed, which I always think about in a hindsight. Instead of looking at David and saying, you're next, let me train you to be the great king coming up next, Saul looked at it as a threat. And we've seen that. We saw a decline, and it eventually leads to what we see in chapter 10. He couldn't take it. It broke him.
Saul killed 1,000, David killed 10,000.
You know, and when we hear that, we understand that seed was planted not because of David. That seed was planted because Saul never saw past what God was telling him. We seen Saul. A lot of people say, "Oh, it happened," you know, when he broke the second time, where he told him, "Hey, I told you to cut up everybody." My story's getting messed up. So Samuel comes down when he said, "Hey, all these goats," and he chop them up. And Saul grabbed him and he tear. Hey man, this is how the kingdom of Israel is going to be torn from y'all. That was a speed through of a lot of books. But what I'm saying is, in that speed through, we see that Saul. That wasn't the first time Saul was disobedient. He was disobedient and shaken when the people said, "Hey, the Philistines are pretty tough. We want to run and hide." And he said, "Well, maybe I'll make the sacrifice." He did something that wasn't according to the law.
Right.
Keep note, Saul wasn't a priest. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. We see it in history. So we know Saul's error in his ways. However, Saul wasn't a priest, but neither was David. Keep that in mind. I say that because the understanding of the difference of the two is based in the obedience of the two. Saul was disobedient. So at the end of Saul's obedience, Saul kind of mirrors what we see in Judas. We see someone who believes that God can't repair what is broken. So when Saul sees in chapter 10 that the Philistines are starting to come down on him and they're rocking him arrows from all over the place and rocks is being thrown, Saul is in a place of complete despair. The line of Benjamin now rests on Saul. This will be forever something that when we talk about Benjamin as a tribe, Saul's name will come up. I don't care how you look at it. If you're having tribal conversations, Benjamin is mentioned. First, we're going to talk about how he was the youngest. Then you'll talk about his name, what it means. But then we always get to somewhat of a stain on the Benjamites' legacy. Now, we don't really even talk about what they did as a clan back in the days of Judges. What is really harping on about the Benjamites is that Saul was the head of it all. So do you understand now? We're getting ready to go into the realm where God is saying, okay, y'all want it? I'm going to give it to you. One person is going to be the head of it all. And however this one person acts, this is how I'm going to treat Israel. Because y'all asked for this person. And if y'all are disobedient to him, therefore, you're going to get the punishment because you're not obedient to your king. And as you see, when we get into these kings, you're going to see some of the people was just as disobedient as some of the bad kings were. The idols didn't just get put up in the town because the king wanted to go around and say put them in town. Yes, it was a decree, but a lot of people was putting the pressure on the kings to bring foreign idols in. That's why some of the texts say, hey, sometimes they were punished for the kings, and sometimes they were punished for the people. So just know that this is where we're going. In these storylines, we're going to follow a lineage. Go ahead.
Yeah, also, if we get in the socks of Saul, we'll see Saul didn't have a template. He didn't have a king before him that he could say, hey, this king did this, so I better not do it. Or this king did this, and this was a good idea. Saul's template was God. God was their king. So he didn't have a human template, like David did, and like the other kings did. So they knew from experience, why God judged the nation because of the kings and because of the people. So it's like being being a parent for the first time, and your mom and dad didn't raise you. Being a general for the first one in the military, you have no template to go by. And back then, they didn't have what do they call those turnover folders?
Yeah.
SOP, there it is. There, you still working hard, man. Thank you. We needed that.
Have anything, so he just went from, hey, I'm in charge,
I should be ashamed we know what SOP is. All of y'all do. No, but
I want to put that out there, because get in the socks of Saul, imagine God being the king, and all of a sudden now you will put in the socks of Saul to do, just as good as God you can. Yeah, I mean.
no way. Saul went into a job. It's like, we watch all these television shows where like, hey man, we're gonna do a practical joke. What's the practical joke? We're gonna make him king. Like Saul basically got punked. He had no chance of being a good king. Like it did, like it's your Saul. Again, we are just talking the people in this situation here. Is it written anywhere? No, but all of us have feelings of emotion. We've all been at some point of leadership. I don't care if you're just leading your little cousin down the street so they don't get tripped because your mama told them to go to the store. We've all been at a point of leadership. We've all stood there, but we all failed in comparison of the person who gave us the job. It never have. If your mom say, watch your little sister, right? Or your little brother, and they leave and you go and they come home. If you did a good job, your mom say, hey, you did exactly how I expect you. But you do a good job, your mom say, hey, you're in trouble because you didn't live up to the expectations. And I should say it's hard to be a mom when I'm not a mom. I'm a child. So it's hard to be a king for Saul when he really wasn't a king.
But you have to also understand, God told him that he was their king. Like I said, I'm your king. You don't need other king. But then you go back to the point we said the people wanted, right?
So Saul was the people's king.
That's exactly
David was God's king.
Right. That's the difference right there.
And when you hear about David, one of the things that was said about David is that he was a man after God's heart. Whether you look at it as a man after God's thoughts and feelings, how he expressed them when he said, hey, I stand up for those that are weak. I go receive those that are far off and lost. David had a heart just like God's heart was described for his people. David just basically did it for his father. That was the first thing. He had an obedient heart, and then he had a heart that was willing to do. So when we see David and we see the difference, because we already heard about Saul. Like, if we remember Samuel, it was more David running and Saul chasing. So we heard about Saul. So let's put Saul to rest in a manner that we understand it. We're looking at scripture's hindsight. We're putting Saul to rest because Saul has did what he could do best as a king, and we see that Saul has error. But I always remind people, I always say the same thing about Saul as what David said. He was the anointed. And that is the end of the story when we come to Saul. So Saul has fought, that part of Saul. So Saul and his armor bearer out there on the battlefield. Now the arrows are flying, and Saul says, hey, I refuse to let the Philistines come and take me. Now,
He was wounded bad.
he was wounded bad. Now, here's the thing. When Saul said this, I want to paint a picture of what the Philistine taking meant. We hear that the beheading, but the Philistine, I looked up the word and I went back and when they called him the Philistine dog, this word also was a word for an effeminate man, a homosexual. So the Philistines had very vile practices. They would have gotten a king's body. They would have defiled it, because defile means one word in the scriptures. They would have defiled it. They would have dragged it around their town. They would have made it a mockery. And Saul, in his mind, said, I don't want to live through that, because he didn't think that he had the will to make it through. Saul had finally reached the final point of where his faith could stand, and he realized instead of calling on God, he would rather fall into his own hand than God's hand. We hear David say, I'd rather fall into the hand of the Lord. So now we see some of the contrast differences between David and Saul. So as we roll into David's life, when you see these people around David, and it seems like David is kind of like, yeah, you know, because the way the chroniclers tell him, it's like David is kind of relaxed. You don't hear about a lot of battles. You hear about his royalty, his decision making, and how he's running the kingdom. I always say, if you want to kind of get a glimpse at what kind of Christ was doing in a humble way, look at what David was doing in a battle way. He was eliminating anything that stood against God, and he had a squad to do it. Man, that guy squad was decent. All right, so this is really quick. What I just gave you was the kingdom of Israel in a nutshell from going from the judges. We didn't talk about it. We basically talked about a lot of the lineage, but now we got past the judges. We're to a king. So I'm going to give you a brief clip of the whole kingdom of Israel and a snip, and I'll give you the scriptures if you want to go back and revisit Saul. Israel demanded a king. You get that in 1 Samuel 8 through 9. Saul is chosen and anointed. 1 Samuel 10 and 11. Saul put to the test in a routine against the Ammonites. Now, who is the Ammonites? Are those relatives? Yeah, they relative. Them Lot's kids, ain't it? So Saul is already fighting his relatives. All right, Ammonites because they were wicked. Saul vested with all authority by Samuel and charged to keep covenant with the Lord, confirmed counsel. 1 Samuel 12. Saul rescued the Israel rescue. Oh my, this is small print. Boy, y'all, they was not playing back in the day. You really had a magnifying glass. Saul rescued Israel from the Philistines' yoke and clashed with Samuel. This is you hear about this clash in 1 Samuel 13 through 15 when you go back to your studies. Saul meets David, who became an outlaw before Saul, meaning Saul was chasing him because of Saul's jealousy. 1 Samuel 16 to 20. David hunted like a partridge flea in Philistia. They call that man a partridge. Huh? 1 Samuel 26:20. And a final great battle between Israel and Philistia at Mount Gilboa. Saul and his sons were slain. 1 Samuel 28 and 31, and Chronicles 1:10, where we are talking about it now. All right. Now, let's get to the main event. Just kidding, because we still got to talk about some more people. I promise you, it's coming. It's coming. Main event is coming. The main event is actually, as I go back and read it, it's pretty interesting that the majority of the time you hear about what David's men are doing and how David is governing those men. So it seems like the excitement comes from the leadership that David has. And that gives you a greater understanding of a leader that we have in our life. All right. So let's get to chapter 9. Whew. Chapter 9 is the genealogy of the post-exilic community, meaning these are the people that were already exiled and coming back. So this is the story is now going forward. So this is why sometimes when people in Chronicles, they get that little thing on their brow where they drop their head like, I don't know where I'm at in time. I feel like, who are we talking about? Who walking around where? So I'm letting you know right now, this is post-exile. These are people coming back in. This is after Babylon. This is everything is destroyed, and they're walking into their town. Some of them aged, some of them that went over that were young, maybe in their 15, teenagers, never been there. So when they get to go walk back, because think about it, right? It got destroyed. After it got destroyed, there was some lamentations going on. The city was there. It was people who were left there after it got destroyed because everybody didn't get snatched up and taken. So it was very rare that people went back and forth back to Jerusalem. I was like, man, they got taken away. Why didn't you just say, all right, well, like, because they were free in Babylon. Like as we hear the stories, Daniel's walking around, Shadrach, Meshach. So you would think, could they leave the city gates to go back to Jerusalem? I guess nobody ever really think about that or mention it. So Jerusalem stood in rubble because God said it was going to stand in rubble. That's why nobody went back. Simple enough. So when people say, hey, why they didn't go back? Because God said they wasn't going back. They stayed in captivity for 70 years where they were supposed to be. And the ones that didn't go, it was to fulfill prophecy. So with that being said, we're talking about the people going back in. All right, this genealogy includes 9, 1 through 4. I feel like I went to 10. Yeah, I went to 10, gave y'all Saul and everything, and I'm going back right here to give you all the Levites post-exile. And the reason why I set it up like that, because I wanted to show y'all Saul, all the people, and then I not confuse you with where we are in time. All right, so this is post-exile. This lists the genealogy of the Israelites who returned from exile in Babylon. The genealogy includes the priests, the Levites, and other tribes, highlighting the restored community and connection to Israel's past, teaching the restoration and identity. You get that in the first chapter in Chronicles 9. It provides a glimpse in the restoration of Israel community post after Babylon. The chapter genealogy lists inhabitants. All right. No, then I want to give y'all anything that's not needed. All right, so it talks about the inhabitants of Jerusalem, 35 through 44. This chapter describes the inhabitants of Jerusalem after the exiles, including the Benjamites and Saul's family. And as you see, chapter 9, after it talks about all the different the genealogy and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, I want to point out a little quick keynote here. As I had said, these old Bibles, they're very informative. Some of the things that over time they changed, terminology. Well, when they went back into Jerusalem, the tribes that were once known as greater numbered tribes, like, hey, that's the tribe of Dan, that's the tribe of this. When they went back into Jerusalem, they were known as the Jerusalemites. Making sense? That's how we get the Jews. We went from because Judah and Benjamin is the tribe that the majority of came in. So when they went out as Israel, because that's who they went out. And they still was Israel, but everybody else started referring to them as the Jerusalemites, the ones that came from Jerusalem. Because the history had got kind of lost. You see what I'm saying? They went from having a full history of knowing everything they were as Israel to having, well, these are just the people that came from Jerusalem. Because Babylon wasn't just taking Jerusalem, it was taking other nations in as well. Remember, Babylon was growing. I already told you some of the things Babylon was doing. That's the breakdown. That's Rehoboam. All right. Any questions so far? Good. I like no questions. All right. I told y'all about what happened with Jabesh Gilead, how they went and they got Saul's body after Saul was killed, after he was murdered, or after he killed himself. Kind of like a double. He got shot and he got stabbed, killed himself. So after that happened, his body was taken. It was defiled. They hung it on a wall. They cut his head off. Well, the men that Saul had previously saved, his previous good deed, they said, no, we're not going to allow Saul's body to stay out there. They gathered all they men up, their town, their clan, and they went and got Saul's body. And I'd say that's a pretty good feat for we start talking about some of the mighty men, because Saul had mighty men of his own. Even though he was a fallen king, he still had people that he had done good for and was willing to go and recover his body. Now, during that time of the recovery of Saul's body, we know that David heard about it and he mourned. He lamented for 7 days. And, it was crazy because everybody would say, hey, David, why are you crying over Saul? He tried to kill you. He said, at the end of the day, that was my father. And so not only that, he was anointed child of God. Like, it's a great loss to the kingdom. And I see the wisdom of David being anointed. We already see that wisdom there, the wisdom of a king. At a time when he could stand and gloat, he didn't. Now, we've talked about Saul. We've talked about his sons. We've talked about everything from the lineage to the history, from Adam to Abraham, from Abraham to David, to where we are right now. Now, David was anointed king by Samuel. And as the word has been floating around in my house, Dianu, which means in Hebrew, it would have been enough. Because David had already been anointed as king by Samuel. And Samuel's anointing came from who? Came from God. Simple question. Samuel's anointing came from God. So that anointing that came from God superseded the anointing that David's about to get now in the beginning. And it said in the beginning of chapter 11, we finally made it to chapter 11. We are finally where David is. We have finally caught up to the end of 2 Samuel, where David was in the beginning of 1 Kings. Well, that's 2 Samuel, 1 Kings. I always get them right. Huh? The end of one and the beginning of the other. All right. So with that being said, here we see David and his mighty men, how he governed, some of the decisions that he made. I may pull out a little bit of excerpts from non-canonical books to talk about, maybe not to talk about the books important, but as in topic, but to say these books, although non-canonical, they are part of David's story. So if you want more addition to the story, go for them, read them. They're long reads, and they talk about a lot of decisions that David made that were very similar to Solomon. I'm telling you, David was very intelligent when it came to decision making. He actually told him one of the stories I read in the book of Gad. There was a man who came up and he was being shady. And he said, "Hey, that's my money in the bag." And David said, "Well, how much money is in the bag?" And David looked and he counted. And the guy said, "Well, it's 75." And David said, "Well, it's not 75, it's this amount. And I'll just set it right here until the person whose money this is comes along." It was a way because a man was trying to be, underhanded, but the way he did it, he made that man's own conscience be his true judge. So a lot of the things that we seen with Solomon, he had a wise father. His father wasn't stupid by no means. We know this. But David was smart. I mean, he was smart in good ways. He was smart in bad ways. I mean, at a time like that, to conspire a whole murder plan, like, we barely know how to find my socks some days, let alone conspire a whole plan to send somebody forward. But these are also stories that define David, but you might not notice them here in the Chronicles. Have you ever noticed Chronicles is very nice when it comes to David? They don't talk about some of his woes because it's a difference. First and Second Samuel was written by the seer. It was written by Samuel, and Samuel kept it cut and dry. He said the good and bad, but this was written as a historical account going back in. You really didn't want to paint your king as a horrible person because they already knew. They knew some of the wrongs that he did. All right, so we're at chapter 11, 1. We're going to go line by line. I'll give you different scriptures. Here's where some of it I might read an entire text just to read it and then go back and we'll illustrate it and give you other scriptures to balance it out. But this, I was going to be going forward because we're going to pick up the pace. It's time to get into the stories. We're going to roll through some names again too, but they're going to be few and far between as we go on. I want to let you know we're going to cut from here, talking about David. We're going to cut from here at the end of the Chronicles and go right back to Solomon because that's where we are. David is an old man. It's finishing. So let's get started. Let's get into the life of David. All right, or the glory that was told in post-Israel. Then all of Israel gathered themselves to David unto Hebron, saying, "Behold, you are thy bone and thy flesh." These were clan, these were people, these were family members. So David is being identified. This is my family. And they said, and moreover, in times past, I want to make sure I give you all this. All right, you can reference that, what David was saying. So what David said is in 2 Samuel 5:1. All right, he says, "Your flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. In times past, and moreover, in times past, even when Saul was king, thou was the leadest out and brought, you led out and brought Israel in." Basically, David, even when Saul was king, you were really still doing the job that Israel needed to do. He's saying that we had a king, and under that king, you still was the one that got Israel's roles, nations, things set up, cities, because a lot of the cities that David took in his running around and a lot of the people that he saved in the process, David ended up bringing those same people back for conquest battles and other things, and they all relied on. We'll see. We'll get into that as well. All right. "And the Lord thy God said unto thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be ruler over my people." Feed, rule over. In other words, a shepherd. To lead the people. See, when we hear stuff like, "Oh, you're going to feed the people," we're thinking like, oh, in the mindset of the people who are not in that culture, we hear feed. We don't liken ourselves to sheep. We thinking of the provisions that we get daily. But when he's talking about David, they're telling David, this is the provision that we are putting you over the flock to make sure that the flock is taken care of. You're the one that we are choosing because God chose you. So we see the first David, anointed by God, honored by the people.
This is what I meant earlier when I said Saul was the people's king. And kind of like when Saul, let me put it in this vernacular, when Saul was a king, it was kind of like we would call today Democratic Iran. The people, would be satisfied, but now David is kind of like Republican run. He takes this sort of one man and he rules as a king of God put him there. I just want to put in that vernacular so you can see that David actually rules as a king in a very different way than Saul, because he made just a bunch of rules and rulings without consulting the people.
Saul made moves on his own. We get some of our understanding about obedience from what Saul did. Saul was disobedient when he tried to sacrifice. We get the understanding of obedience is greater than sacrifice. So Saul had his purpose. Saul had his teaching for everybody who would ever come across the man that we know as Saul. So it's that taking the orders from yourself, listening to your own internal compass, even though you think you're doing good, you should always do what David did. Consult God first, because that's what made David also a man after God's heart. He understood that he also should always go to God, no matter what the situation was. All right. So David is made king. You shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over them. Then all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and there David made a covenant with them. Now we hear David is making a covenant with the people. David made a covenant with them in the presence of the Lord, and they anointed him king over Israel in accordance with the word of the Lord as revealed through Samuel. So we now have our king. So David now has a king. One of the main things that every king needs is a place to hang his hat. And what more beautiful of a place to hang his hat than Jerusalem? So now we're going to see David take Jerusalem. Now, in a time before David, Jerusalem probably wasn't as beautiful. But we know by the time that we get to the second king, that Jerusalem is the eye of the world. I try to explain it like I don't know how, the best way to tell it. We see in history that television portrays kings a certain way. I think the closest they may get to it is the pharaohs, where they show all the big rooms of gold. I went back and I watched Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments. If you really want to understand how beautiful it was back then, go take a movie, go check it out. And I'm going to tell you like this, the 10 Commandments didn't even come close how big these rooms were carved out, how much gold was everywhere in these kingdoms. So when David said he's going to Jerusalem, the same eye that put David on Jerusalem was the same eye that was watching and said, I will make that my city on a hill. Because David knew a king needs a place to hang his hat. So now we're going to talk about how David captured Jerusalem. Then David and Israel. Remember what I told you. Anytime now, as David the king made a call, after all of the conquests, bringing in Gentiles during his conquest, because we're going to hear some of those people that were maybe close to Israel, but with David and he brought them in, some of his mighty men were not from the tribes of Israel. But when David made the call to go get the jewel that's set at the top of the hill, it wasn't a call that was given out to just anyone. David said, you have made me king. Now hear Israel, let's see if you stand. Let's go and capture the city. Then David and all of Israel, how many people? All. Not one person. Because remember, there were rules. If a man was 20 years old, he was fighting. So this is a time when Israel's at its strongest, at its peak, even though it seemed like it was at its weakest. If you think about it in the sense of how I think about some things, and my brain work a little crazy, Israel Hill had actually been struck. And it survived. It had a death. It was struck. And in new life we have David. Israel itself was struck. They lost their king. But in that striking, we had a new king, a better king than what was of old, a better way to act, a new law, one law, which came from Benjamin, which should have went one way. It should have taught people, should have made them do the right thing, to another law, a law that was given and followed by God, but in that law was the body. In the law itself was in the body of the person. Am I making sense? Just trying to here. All right, so David's going to go get himself a mighty city. And David went to Jebus, where the natives of that land were called the Jebusites. And the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, "You shall not enter here." Now, we talked about this story in Samuel, right? We went over it. It said, "You will not enter here." And they constantly told him, "Hey, can't get through this gate. If you want to get in here, it's better. Our lame and broken can defend our gates." Now, how many people from Israel is there? All. Okay. So I don't understand how a walled city that has understood that the people who come down this line have taken down walled cities like paper just by walking around them and blowing a horn for a couple of days. I don't think you want to see what a fighting version of that is, but I guess the Jebusites decided that day to choose violence. And it was a horrible choice for them because that day David whooped on them pretty good. And when he whooped on them pretty good, he said, "Hey, now take the lame and the blind down by the river and wash them." Now, you got to be a bad man when you whoop on somebody and then tell them go ahead and get cleaned up. It just lets you know that even though David's conquest, he still was a man of caring. He still was a man that was out there doing what he needed to do. He still was a man of God. And you're probably going to hear me say this a million times, that he was a man of God. So David nevertheless captured the fortress of Zion, which was the city of David. David said, "Whoever strikes the Jebusites first shall be made the chief commander." And his cousin, Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was the first to go up, so he became the chief. David took up his residence in the fortress, which therefore was called the city of David. He rebuilt the city on all sides, from Milo all the way around, while Joab restored the rest of the city. David became more powerful, for the Lord of hosts was with him. So we getting ready to see David is ready to start rocking. Joab is out there. He like, do y'all see the internal workings now that Saul was missing? In a conversation we went over in Samuel, how Saul was always on the edge, where David is one step ahead. Oh, we're going to take a city. But when I take the city, I'm not going to be the one that fully does all the work. When we go into the city, because I need you to clean up the city while I take care of the things on this side of the table royal-wise. So what would Joab be? He was a disciple sent out to do the mission for David. I need you to look at these mighty men because each one of them kind of play a role in something that we see that Jesus was like hitting them, giving the disciples little notes, little tips saying, "You have always been in the line of mighty men. Go step out and do my work. Restore the city." So we're going to put a pin in it right here. So far, David got his city. So far, David got his city. I told y'all when we get in here, we're going to start seeing some of these mighty warriors. Now, I want to know, like when we heard about David and Goliath, we said, no, it can't be topped. David and Goliath can't be topped because David is the man. Who could do better than David in battle? So even just to come close, they gave us some of the feats of these mighty men to show us what if these men submitted their great will to this man, how great is David?
Even before that, David was running away from Saul. He had these mighty men with him. And the only reason why Saul survived, because some of these mighty men wanted to kill him, it's because of David. And so, and the other one point I wanted to point out also, Jerusalem, David didn't just say, "Okay, I want to take Jerusalem." Jerusalem was predestined. It was God had already preordained that. So it wasn't the fact that he said that it's a pretty city and I want to take that city, because even before all of this happened, that was the chief city of Jerusalem. Right?
Yeah. Are you asking me? I thought you was telling me. Oh, you asking me? Oh, okay. Was Jerusalem the chief city? That it was
The capital,
Jerusalem was the capital for who?
city that God had made, set up his
It's called the city of God.
Right.
In that.
Was it the city of God right there? What we talking about? Well, let's read it.
It was
I'm
always
somebody who
ordained
say
to be.
the best way to put things in order is to see it. And it said, then David and all of Israel went to Jerusalem, that is Jebus, where the natives of that land were called Jebusites. The inhabitants of Jebus said to David, you shall not enter here. David nevertheless captured the fortress of Zion. So who were the Jebusites? They were in possession of Jerusalem. So we know that it was preordained for David to have it, but we're talking about David's conquest in it. Up to there, David did not have Jerusalem.
I didn't say that.
Oh,
No.
so we know this. We know, yeah, we know what it. We know what it be.
The city of God.
We,
David, in his battles, for it to be recognized as the city of God.
right, because the city of God becomes the city of God when David went into it. Remember the importance of all of what we're saying, because you're going to hear terms like the division of the kingdom, and it's going to be questioned where to praise and worship, and it's going to be forgotten that it was never about either of the buildings. It was always about God, because when God told, and I'm getting a little ahead, when he told Rehoboam that he was going to be in charge, Rehoboam went up there, and Rehoboam would have been okay if he would have did anything wrong, as long as he would have kept Jerusalem being a place where they worship. But it became divided when he gave another place to worship in Samaria. So what I'm saying is, yes, this was the capital city, but it became the capital city because of David. Because before David, the Jebusites owned it. They were the inhabitants. It became it's just like the Christ in us. If the wicked is in us was the Jebusites, right? I don't care what this city looks like, it's not inhabited by people of God. The Jebusites obviously were people of God, right?
And just like when they went into Canaan, Canaan was the promised land.
It sure was.
Just because the Canaanites was there, it negate the fact that it was the promised land.
It sure was.
That's the only point I was trying to
No,
make.
I get the point that the actual what is it? The actual definition of what the city was always going to be what the city was. The beauty of it is we have it in hindsight. We know David won that city. But before David went in that city, and what we're illustrating here in the Chronicles is that city, even if it was the city of God, in that point, it was a wicked city being run by wicked people, and therefore it wasn't a city of God, even though it was going to be, because once God took over the city, it became God's city. You get what I'm saying? Look at it as that you are, everyone in this room are a child of God. But if we don't accept that walk-in of David into our city, we're just like the Jebusites, lame and blind, and needed to be taken down to the water and washed. So I get what you're saying. And it's hard to see that mindset because a lot of the story I'm telling in an order as it's kind of happening. You know, we know, man, look, we could skip to the end and say they was one of the greatest kings. But I want to paint the picture. So thank you for pointing out Jerusalem was always God's. Just like David was always God. Just like Samuel was always God.
It's always God. And the fullness thereof is God. That's the sovereign side, but the human side, at this point, it had become the city of God.
It had to become everything right now in the Chronicles. When we go back and we hear about David's running, you don't really hear about anything kind of becoming. David goes from one city, sets it up, does what he need to do, goes from another city, in here, we finally start to hear of David not running in stability. Think about it. Samuel, he was always on the run until after Saul died, and it was kind of like a little part right there in the end, and then you went on. But here, we're hearing what David did as a king sitting down. And the reason why we're hearing what he did as a king is because the chroniclers want us to know that a king that we're talking about, it's a greater king coming. Remember, they went into Babylon. They was with the Chaldeans. They heard what the Chaldeans said. And I guarantee if Daniel was in there and he was the ruler over the Chaldeans, I bet you they heard about predictions and prophecies and things coming. Daniel, remember they said, what tribe was it? Was it Ishkar? They said these men were intelligent men, and they knew the times. That means they understood the stars. They listened to what the tribal leaders were saying. These people were, so when they went into Jerusalem, Babylon, they came out. Guarantee everybody. I went to my sister's house just to visit her to eat lunch. When I left a little bit wiser because of the information that I gained when I went into her house. So when they went into Babylon, you best believe those Jerusalemites that came out, they were a lot wiser than what they went in. So let's hold on right here. Thank you for pointing out that in the grand aspect of things, you may hear me say, hey, it wasn't. But like Eric pointed out, it always was. You tracking? Cool. On that note, are there any questions about tonight? And that was an amazing question to put things in perspective, to line it up. Man, you even gave me a chance to preach the gospel on how I should walk into your heart, using the Jebusites as an example. So with that being said, I'm going to take my leave. I hope y'all enjoyed this, what I call allowing me to get all this crazy out of my mind that sits in there on a daily basis. The good thing is a good crazy. And these books somehow are just getting heavier and heavier. So, but they're getting heavier for y'all because I love to read and share the things that I discover. Anything else? Thank y'all so much, man. Man, y'all the best.